Good morning, friends, and a very warm welcome to this discussion that we have today on Fire and Fury. Excellent book. Those of you who haven't read should get it, and they are all being displayed outside. I'm extremely grateful to Mr. Pallav Bagla for suggesting us this opportunity, and of course to Dr. Kakodkar for putting the book together, and of course very kindly agreeing to join us this morning, sir. We are extremely grateful to you. For some of us at RIS who are trying to explore the various linkages that science has with the economy and the wider development opportunities, it's a great occasion for us to have you with us, both in terms of the substantive work program that we have on science and policy analysis, but also the new facet of it, which under the leadership of Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan, we are going ahead with under a major project which DST, and I'm glad that Dr. Sadhana Relia has joined us today here, led by Secretary DST. A new project has been launched for last 1.5 years at RIS and at NIAS Bangalore, where we are trying to connect science and diplomacy. Under this, we have done a couple of case studies where we are trying to explore how Ministry of External Affairs and the various establishments within science and technology in India can work together. What are the successful stories and where we failed? And from that perspective, we requested different scientists to write out their own impressions and experiences, and what is it that we can add to the policy making. Ambassador Gokhale took a very keen interest, and we had full support from Secretary ER, Mr. Tirumurti. So these two persons from MEA shaped the broad contours of the project, and from DST we had Mr. Vijay Raghavan and Secretary DST. So with these 4 people, the whole project is shaped. We requested first Professor Siddharth himself to contribute the first case study on what is the idea, the lexicon. What is happening is that the whole lexicon, ideas and concepts related to science diplomacy have emanated more out of the approach that US and couple of other countries came up with. So what should be developing country perspective, how we should evolve our own terminologies, our own approaches, our own reference frameworks that are needed. And we requested Professor Siddharth, and he wrote out a beautiful essay in terms of how indigeneity matters when we talk about self-reliance in science, technology and innovation across the field. Then we requested Professor Ashok Patsarthi to write out the case on our elements related to the semiconductor industry. We also approached Dr. Grover to write out his own experiences. Then Dr. P.K. Ghosh from Department of Biotechnology to write out about the vaccine industry and our experience with vaccine as world's biggest supplier of the vaccines in Africa and in many other parts of the world. So these are the 4 case studies that have already appeared, and this book fits in so well, and it goes, of course, in much wider perspective. It brings out the history of atomic energy, but it also tells us about how Eklavya really becomes Dronacharya himself. And when you become Dronacharya, you really lead several fellow developing countries on the contours of the science policy that developing countries should decide and how they go forward. So this brings in a great complementarity and great addition to the work that we are already doing here at RIS. Year before last, Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan himself had come out with a book which captured the essence of science diplomacy, and what we are trying to do is to address it not only at the bilateral level, but also at the multilateral institutional level, how we can connect and what are the dimensions that are there. This year, Prime Minister, when he was in New York at the high-level political forum and UNGA meeting, also announced India's joining of the pilot project that has been launched by Japan after the G20 presidency on leveraging STI for SDGs. So how science, technology, innovation can be leveraged for achieving SDGs. And there again, RIS and the PSA's office are working very closely with a couple of developing countries in Africa and Asia. So these are really becoming times when the concepts that you have discussed about, of course in a different context, on strategic autonomy for expansion of science technology, I think is very pertinent and extremely important. It also brings out the possibility of how the developing countries themselves can also partner. So these are some of the ideas and background that RIS is working in. And sir, I would also like to mention to you that RIS was established in 1984 by the Ministry of External Affairs as part of India's commitment to non-aligned movement. And the idea was that we explore the alternative vision that is there for development. And fortunately, we got Professor Sukhmoy Chakravarti, who could define the new international economic order that developing countries should work on, and the idea of self-reliance. So that has been one of our mandate, and I'm very glad that with science technology, we are doing this experiment. Today, we have a very rich panel and a great opportunity to hear you talking about your work and this book. I would request my senior colleague, Dr. Bhaskar Balakrishnan, to chair this session. And before that, Mr. S.K. Malhotra to make initial remarks.
Thank you, Professor Chaturvedi. Respected Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan, who is chairing the session, just it has been announced. Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Dr. Anil Kakotkar, Dr. Suresh Gangotra, Shri Pallav Bagla, Professor Rajaram, and of course, sitting in the audience, I happen to know him personally, so Ambassador Shilkant Sharma ji. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you, and I am really honored and very glad that Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, RIS, has taken this initiative, and that's how we are all assembled together for today's talk by Dr. Anil Kakotkar, followed by a panel discussion on fire and fury, co-authored by Dr. Kakotkar and Dr. Suresh Gangotra, and recently published by Rupa Publications. I consider myself as a real fortunate person and I had the pleasure to directly work with Dr. Kakotkar for a decade, that is directly working under him for a decade when he was at the peak of his career at Department of Atomic Energy. This is my personal view, and I think many of my colleagues at DAE will agree with that, my view. He has been the most impactful chairman of Atomic Energy Commission. I would say second only to Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha, knowing the fact, Dr. Kakotkar also knows that nobody can match Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha because he multiplied from zero. And subsequently, I think in the 9 years that he was chairman, as you will see from the book and probably hear from his talk also, that how he gave a momentum to the program of Department of Atomic Energy. For example, you were talking of case study, so take the nuclear power program as the case study. During his chairmanship, that is between 2000 to 2009, 10 new reactors became operational in India. That works out to more than 1 reactor per year. And let me remind you, recently now DAE, after having only 2 reactors in last 10 years, see, it is 10 years that Dr. Kakotkar laid down his office as chairman of Atomic Energy Commission. And in the last 10 years, we could put up only 2 reactors. And now once again, DAE has recently started telling that in the coming few years, or maybe in a decade or so, they would like to put 1 reactor per year. They would like to launch actually. Now they are talking of launching, not completing. Now, besides putting these reactors, Dr. Kakotkar worked really hard to boost the domestic uranium supplies. I recollect that as soon as he became chairman and I happened to go to his office, he was really sitting with his hand on his forehead, and I thought why he seems to be a little worried, and I asked him. And then he told me his fears. He said, we have such an ambitious program and I am not very comfortable with the situation of uranium in India. And from there he picked up, and I think, as they say, sir, in this book, or now I am confused, or in Marathi book you have written that food stuck in between the teeth, that was also taken out. So practically uranium in whatever form, wherever lying in the department, every nook and corner was cleaned up and uranium was recovered. And that's how, and new mines were opened, new mills were opened during his era, and lot of domestic supply. Because domestic supply is very important. I will not elaborate on that, but particularly for our strategic program, those of you who know about the separation plan of India's nuclear power program, they will appreciate that how important is the domestic supply of uranium for the department and for the country. So he ensured that there is enough supply of uranium on the domestic front. And this was on one hand, and on the other hand, he championed the civil nuclear cooperation between India and other countries, and came out with that. I think Pallav will recall the excitement at India's Pacific Safeguard Agreement with IAEA. Those were the days. I think Pallav was also busy, and so were we all at Department of Atomic Energy. So it is not only about the uranium supplies, from other countries, but he also steered the way for India civil nuclear cooperation with many countries. The idea was to boost the installed capacity in India based on imported fuel in the reactors built under technical cooperation with these other countries. As he has mentioned in the book, I mean, it's a little painful recalling that definitely having done so much up to 2008-9, I think we at DAE could have done better to really encash upon this opportunity available through these international cooperations, but I think somewhere we have lagged behind. Anyway, regarding all this, I don't know what he is going to speak about, but maybe he will touch upon these points. So you hear it from Dr. Kakotkar himself, either today in his lecture or otherwise I suggest you read the book. Besides this, of course, he gave a definite thrust to the non-power applications of nuclear power, which are very important. Actually, this is one industry, the non-power applications of, or sometimes we call them as the societal applications of nuclear power. In fact, if you look at the world over, this business, non-power applications of nuclear energy, they have overtaken in terms of business as compared to the nuclear power. It's a multi-billion dollar industry today. So he gave a thrust to this and made it a very important activity. And besides that, of course, the development of frontier technologies, mega science projects, international projects, etc. I think I will not elaborate. I really don't want to consume too much of time. Coming back to Fire and Fury, let me now speak about the contribution of Dr. Suresh Gangotra, or in a very friendly manner, I say his contribution can be summarized. I'll say in Hindi, इन्होंने आग में घी डालने का काम किया है, Fire and Fury. So he has added ghee to that fire. In Dr. Kakotkar's own words, there had been many efforts to write his biography or autobiography, but nothing could really take off. Finally, one day, during a casual discussion with Dr. Gangotra, he himself offered to pen down Dr. Kakotkar's thoughts, and that's how, rest is history, that's how it happened, and the book is in front of you. Now, picking up from where Dr. Chaturvedi left, he referred to Eklavya. So, in fact, it was Dr. Kakotkar's wish that the book be named as Eklavya's report card. But I think it was not agreed upon by the co-author, Suresh Gangotra. So, I think he gave into his suggestion. But वो बोलते हैं ना कि जो बात दिल में रहती है वो कहीं ना कहीं बाहर आ जाती है. So he said, okay, title is yours, but my page will remain my page. So he has his own page, author's page in the book, where he has titled it as Eklavya's report card. Now here actually, I have told earlier also Dr. Kakotkar, this is one thing in which I do not agree with him at all. He cannot call himself as Eklavya. I am sorry, sir. I don't agree with that. Maybe one attribute of Eklavya can be, I can say that it is there in Dr. Kakotkar, and that is the perseverance of Eklavya, which we find in Dr. Kakotkar. But I think the comparison ends there. And as Professor Chaturvedi told that from Eklavya he graduated to become the Acharya himself, Dronacharya. But I'll add to that. Actually, if we look into the characters of Mahabharata, you will find you have many positive characters and attributes of many positive characters. So, for example, you take Yudhishthir, he is a Dharmaraj, Dr. Kakotkar, because he is always on the right side of things. That I have observed myself. And probably from Arjun, like Arjun, he is highly focused. Bhim, I think people may laugh, his personality doesn't look like that of Bhim. So maybe the physical personality does not match that of Bhim. But I think some of you will recall that during the Indo-US agreement particularly, the American media had described him as the 600-pound gorilla. I think there is a mention in the book also. So I think there the Bhim character is also there. When it comes to protecting the rights of the country, he can become Bhim and he can protect India all alone. And then, of course, Nakul and Sahadev, maybe because of my limited knowledge, I could not find any particular attribute, but I would say they were very faithful to the elder brothers. So he has been, like Nakul and Sahadev, he has been very faithful to his seniors, and to the country. So now probably in the talk something will come out. Only one character is left, and when he speaks, probably you yourself will realize that when you listen to him, you might see a tinge of Lord Krishna reading Gita to or narrating Gita to Arjuna. So I think with these words, I do not want to come in the way of Dr. Kakotkar and all of you. I wish a very fruitful deliberation today, of course, during his talk and the panel discussion. Thank you very much. And once again, I thank RIS and Professor Chaturvedi for giving me a chance to come here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Malhotra. First of all, let me thank all of you, friends and distinguished ambassadors, so many of you here, for coming this morning to attend this program, this event, which is part of the Science Diplomacy program at RIS. Let me just say a few words about what we are trying to do in science diplomacy. Science diplomacy, in a nutshell, basically means the integration of science and technology into foreign policy in its fullest extent. Now, there are many ways of doing this, and what has happened is over the decades, science and technology developments have taken place at an extremely rapid rate, and they have a profound effect on the economic and strategic capabilities of nation states. So it is obviously necessary for science and technology to be factored into foreign policy and international relations. Now, in doing this, developing countries face particular challenges because of the fact that in science and technology they may not be at the frontier. Secondly, a lot of the agenda is set by the advanced countries. In any case, we thought that it is time that from the South, we have a Southern perspective on science diplomacy, and that is what we are trying to do in our program. And as part of this program, we have a series of lectures by eminent practitioners of science as well as diplomacy. And we are very happy that today we are able to get Dr. Anil Kakotkar to talk to us on transforming India's strategic identity. So I look forward to a very, very interesting presentation, and by the panelists, I thank them all for coming here to be with us, and also to the reactions and comments from the audience. So I won't take more time. I will invite Dr. Kakotkar to deliver his talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Balakrishnan, Professor Chaturvedi, Professor Rajaraman, Pallav Bagla, my colleague Shri Malhotra and Dr. Gangotra. And I'm actually overwhelmed with the presence of so many eminent people here in this hall. I do hope that everyone would find a reasonably good utilization of your time now that you have decided to be a part of this program. But thank you very much all the same. Let me first begin with this idea of the book itself. And this actually was lingering in my mind in the sense, whenever one is about to retire, you start doing your retirement planning, and I would say writing a book about yourself is invariably one part of that agenda, and that was also the case with me. But then the imagination that after you retire there will be plenty of time, that assumption actually fell flat. And there was no way one could spend time contemplating and organizing yourself. So this project didn't go beyond a few paragraphs, maybe a couple of pages. Then, of course, there are several friends who have been prompting me to write. Some, in fact, also started taking initiative like me, that okay, if you don't write, you talk to us, we will write. But even that effort didn't go very far. And I was not too much worried about it, because I always had this thought that, it's better to allow some time to elapse so that you are kind of a little more detached from the center of events which you were kind of in for some time or a long time. And then once you are sufficiently detached, you can kind of reflect on things a little more dispassionately. And so I was not too worried about it. But then it was almost 10 years and I started getting worried about the fact that whether the age will overtake to an extent that I'll start forgetting things. And this was when Dr. Gangotra one day, he came to discuss about his paper, and I must admit that I'm yet to make progress on that. But he says, why have you not written? So I narrated practically everything the way I described now. And he says, of course, Gangotra has been quite close to me, so he can order me. So he says, pull out your diary, ask me to block several dates as a first installment. And he says, I'm going to come with a tape recorder and we are going to speak, and then the rest of it I will do. So in that sense, I think he's the key individual who has made this book possible. So thank you, Dr. Gangotra. I'm not going to summarize what's there in the book, that you would have got a flavor by several reviews which have appeared, or there are people who are going to talk about it. But I do want to touch about a few points. Some of them, actually I got triggered listening to what has been said earlier and also listening to discussion when we were circulating. And a few things which I feel very passionate about, so I thought I'll talk about it, and it's there in the book as well. I have noticed that when one is dealing with a complex program and you have to deal with them over a period of time where you're constantly in a kind of a turbulent environment, I found myself working at cross purposes. I distinctly remember having articulated a particular point of view one way, actually took some action to move according to that point of view, and maybe a year or two down the line, I found myself doing exactly opposite. And several people have actually pointed this out to me, that, well, what are you up to? And if I had to give you one example, all of you know, I have been quite deep in making use of thorium as a part of Indian Atomic Energy Program. Now, the thorium really has place in Indian Atomic Energy Program in its third stage, because as we know, thorium it's not a fuel by itself, so you have to cook it, and you have to spend energy, you have to spend neutron generating or neutron source capacity. And you want to cook it on a large scale, you want to have that capacity also on a correspondingly larger scale. Now, the only material on which you can start a nuclear reactor, naturally occurring fuel on which you can build a nuclear reactor, is uranium. And we didn't have that in plenty in those days, only modest. And that was really the genesis of Dr. Bhabha's 3-stage program. But then, on one side, shortage of uranium, other side, the serious embargo problem. So, building technology takes its own time. And obviously, the immediate expectation would be to set up reactors, show that you are producing electricity, show that your domestically developed technology works and works well. And that obviously has to be the first priority. So in all this, I found thorium was getting backstage. Then we were looking for opportunities to see that, while recognizing this priority system, what is it that we can do for thorium? And I don't want to get in too technical, but to simply say that when you start a nuclear reactor on uranium, there is obviously there is an excess, the technical term is reactivity, which gets built in, because you start with fresh uranium, which is more active than the uranium once it accumulates fair bit of fission products and other poisons. And so I thought that that's an occasion. When you start a nuclear reactor, you anyway happen to put in some existing, so you can have an opportunity to load certain amount of thorium. And so we began, actually, small scale irradiation of thorium was anyway done in Cyrus reactor later on. Some of it was done in Dhruva, which are research reactors. And then we had actually built a small uranium-233 based reactor, Kamini, which is now running for decades. Even now it's a small system, 30 kilowatt. But here we thought that we have opportunity to do something on thorium on scale. And then, of course, anything, there are a lot of technical issues, and again, I will not go into that detail. But it was a hurdle race, which is all recorded in that in the book. But we succeeded in demonstrating that thorium can be used for power flattening while you start a new reactor. And I think there was a lot of appreciation around the globe for having done that. But you can do that only when you start a new reactor. If you have a running reactor and you introduce thorium in it, then actually the uranium consumption would go up. And that's the phase we entered. And I had actually mobilized the whole department to do something. And after that I said, no, now there is no uranium, so no more thorium irradiation. We have to keep this as a back burner. And then people asked me, what are you up to? But very few people knew at that time that because of shortage of uranium, and on the other hand, our reactors had started performing extremely well. The capacity factor had gone up. In other words, it meant they started consuming uranium on a very big scale, which we didn't have. And then we went past a peak of performance, and the capacity factor of reactors started declining. And there was actually a serious worry whether Nuclear Power Corporation would get into red. We were very close to that. We just, thanks to all that happened, we still sort of survived that corporation, which is a still cash-rich company. But it was just on the threshold of going in red. So while on one side we had established reactor technology, today of course our reactors have been recognized to be the best performance in the world, in the sense the Kaiga Haywater reactor unit has the distinction of being the top performer in terms of the longest uninterrupted continuous power generation in the world. So while that was achieved, in between India's strategic capability was established, India emerged as a de facto nuclear weapon state. But around the same time, there was this huge fear about not having uranium, and whatever capacity was built, that instead of a performing asset, it was, as I said, it was close to becoming a non-performing asset. On top of it, of course, there was a huge objection from audit to say that you are not able to plan well. There is money that is locked up. You didn't plan when you had these reactors. Why did you plan? Did you not plan uranium fabrication? I couldn't tell them that fabrication is something I can organize in a couple of years, but what you need is uranium, and development of mine takes upwards of 10 years. And where is that place? So, the whole history of atomic energy has gone through these ups and downs, and it's very difficult to explain general public about this contradiction. You try to explain about this contradiction, they will say you are only telling stories. And of course, some of it, people did form that opinion. As I retired, I had that at least a sense of satisfaction that I have not left any legacy issue. There is capacity, there is technology, and now there is material resources. Both one can get it from abroad, but thanks to the aggressive exploration work that was taken up, today the domestic uranium availability is also something like 4 times what it was at that time. So we are expanding on all fronts, or at least there is potential to expand. So I retire as a satisfied person, although I have reflected on some of the anguish that still exists in the book, looking at future. I'll leave it at that. Now, let me talk a little bit about the title. I do believe, and I do believe very strongly, that whatever we are, whatever we become, it's all because of people around us and also the general surroundings around us. And in that sense, I do believe that I think to maintain the mindset of individuals and societies at the right place, I think we should all consider that we are all Ekalaviyas. And so I sincerely wanted to title this book as Ekalaviya's report card. And in a sense, you're writing autobiography, you are reporting to the society what you have done for them to do stock taking in whatever way they would want to do. But then obviously everybody felt that, look, how many people would really know the nuances in Mahabharata and all. And I was amazed, Malhotra ji, you took Mahabharata to a fuller extent. And but I do believe, and so I have exercised my right that author has a right to write preface, and I'll write preface the way I like. So that is how that preface is titled like that. I want to talk a little bit about this aspect of science diplomacy which Professor Chaturvedi you triggered. And I do want to make a few basic observations. I do believe that any technology, technology emerges out of scientific research. And so tomorrow's technology exists in the top level laboratories of the world. And science is universal. So getting access to science or getting access to be able to participate in science is somewhat easier. Technology, of course, has a lot of boundaries, national boundaries, geographical boundaries, boundaries dictated by commercial interests, so on and so forth. And so, of course, you can access any technology at cost, except the strategic ones, because those you cannot access even if you are wanting to pay money. But you can always engage with the best minds of the world on research plane. And just to give you an example, we had this, we have a long-standing collaboration with CERN, the European Center for Nuclear Research. And I'm sure all of you know that the World Wide Web got initiated at CERN. And it was done to meet the requirement of such large scientific experiment and management of data and analysis thereof. Now, we have had a long-standing collaboration with CERN at individual levels. I have heard rather that scientists from TIFR have been engaging with CERN right in early 60s or maybe even earlier. And there are deep connections at individual level. Sometime between there was an opportunity when the Large Hadron Collider was to be set up to essentially get more experimental evidence on standard model. So it was a large facility and it was to be done out of international collaboration. And so CERN approached Department of Atomic Energy that how about Department of Atomic Energy making contribution in kind. And so that was actually an opportunity which was immediately we jumped on it. It started in Dr. Chidambaram's time actually. And then, so it was a very interesting model. As a part of that, I'll talk about that model in a moment. But as a part of course, WWW had started much earlier. But CERN had started work on grid computing. Again, to be able to deal with this much larger data that Large Hadron Collider and its experiments would throw up. And we did get opportunity to be a part of that development. And I remember in parallel with activities in CERN at BARC, we developed grid computing. And in fact, we set up grid computers between BARC, Indira Gandhi Center. And these are all forerunners of the cluster computing and then later on cloud and all those things came later. And we did get that handle right at that time. And this was literally cheap. In fact, it was so cheap that the agreement with CERN was that, okay, we will contribute a certain amount in kind, and that whatever we supply to CERN would of course has to pass the specifications and It has to qualify European standards, but it will be also costed at European costs. And any high-tech equipment, thanks to low cost of living in our country, which may not remain so for too long, but at that time it was much higher advantage. Even today it's a sizable advantage. So if I make a component worth 100 rupees, it would get costed as 200 rupees equivalent in euros. And then the deal was that they will give us credit for that contribution of 200 rupees. But half of that would be put in India fund, and only half they will book it in their thing. So if I spend 100 rupees in making something as in-kind contribution for CERN, I would get that 100 rupees back. Only thing is, instead of my account in bank in India, it would sit in a bank in CERN. But it was in India fund, which could be used only for visit of Indian scientists to participate in CERN program. So in reality, I got that experience for doing, for example, several hundreds and a few thousands of superconducting magnets were built in country, in our industry, at literally zero cost to Indian budget. Because anyway, we would have spent that money in sending our scientists. And the Indian industries have actually made superconducting magnets in large numbers in those days. I was more than 10 years old or maybe longer. And that's a technology of tomorrow. So the point I'm making is there is a huge benefit in terms of a good science diplomacy, provided we make these connections. Many times what happens is we have this, start a program, people go, come back. When they come back, they will get into whatever they were doing earlier. Then the whole thing is lost. And there are, of course, much larger number of examples of that type. But the point I'm making is one can organize a relationship where we get tomorrow's technologies today and assimilate it, provided we align science research, domestic technology development all together. And wherever it has happened, I think country has benefited. So I thought this is not the time to give a big lecture on science diplomacy, but I thought I'll just make a mention. Time is running out, so I'll close in another 5 minutes and use that time to talk about future. See, we are all, I don't know whether to think about is a good situation or a bad situation, but see, our economy is not doing well, so the electricity demand or energy demand is not growing as fast. So I think we are sitting pretty at this moment. But if you go by India's aspiration to be among the advanced countries in the world, and the quality of life of common Indian to be comparable with the best in the world, then it's clear that we need to expand our per capita income at least 4 to 5 times than what it is now. Now, that's an ambition which was known for a long time. It continues to be, according to me, a basic truth. The time scale will change depending on how economy progresses. On top of it, we have this climate situation. And the narrative has changed from the climate risks to climate disaster, and now I think that started talking about climate emergency. And some of these numbers that I see, of course, there is always uncertainty in all those projections. But one thing is clear, that what seemed at some stage a century away, the so-called tipping point seems to be approaching us in an accelerated way. or at the moment, in the sense the warming process progressively will go on an in an exponential way and reach an asymptote, which will be the tipping point. Nobody knows when that will be, but earlier it looked like people had talked about this century to be the last century. Now I don't know whether it is still faster. The point is approaching us even faster than that. So instead of a century, are we now talking about half a century? I don't know. And I don't want to get into that debate because there are uncertainties on this. But the have-nots of the world, India included, which happens to be the larger part of the humanity, I think would be left in lurch whenever that situation happens. Because the world is not prepared. There is a huge disparity in the world. There is a huge resource constraint in the world. And now we have done great job in the context of renewable, both solar and wind. But the problem of grid cannot be addressed just by variable energy. There is no way you will be able to address that. And if one decides to address that, you will have to spend huge amount of money. And of course, we can't afford that luxury. And so, India's clean energy future, I think, invariably depends on the rapid growth of nuclear power. And now you would say we were only expecting that I would say this. But I think this crisis is becoming deeper and deeper. And so I would imagine that the implementation of atomic energy program would become more and more aggressive with time. And of course, there are constraints. At each time you see, I mentioned about an era when there was uranium constraint, political constraint in terms of technology embargo. Even today there is a constraint. There is, I think, a huge constraint about the money. From where you'll find the money? I don't think there is any money available there. So obviously one cannot implement atomic energy program on a scale that is required in the business as usual mode. I don't see that possible. And so I think we need to find a way of doing things. And again, I'm not going to use this occasion to discuss that part, but just to highlight that point that there is this need to do things faster. Last point, I mentioned about the disparities in the world, but I think disparities in India themselves are bothering me, and I think they are growing. And India will never remain a stable, peaceful country if we don't attend to the disparities. And there are, of course, many shades to this problem, but I, for one, I think that in turn means that we must pay much greater attention to villages in a more substantive way. And I think just brick mortar approach will not do. Creating roads and creating canals, water bodies, hospitals, schools, by school I mean the school building, won't do. I think we need to focus upon capacity building of individuals. Why can't youth in villages be capable of harnessing all the opportunities that exist in the new era at a level comparable with their counterparts in city or their counterparts in the most advanced countries in the world? And I think that is the challenge. And unless we attend to that challenge at a fast enough pace, I think we'll face a grim future. And I think we need to, there is awareness, I think there is awareness about village development. But uh, we have been talking about socialist economy. How did disparity grow? So I think we need to think through this, and I have talked about this towards the end of my book in a limited sense. This is a big topic. Autobiography, you only talk about things which you are concerned with. So to that extent, I have talked. So that's the broad background with which both of us, we have made this attempt to write and present a report card before the society, before all of you. And of course, you are all the judge, the examiners. So whatever you say, sir aankhon par. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kakodkar, for your thought-provoking remarks, especially the last part of what you said. We have to catch up on our time. So I'm going to request the next panelist, Dr. Suresh Gangotra, to address you.
I will be brief and short. We'll talk about the title, which we have been talking about since morning, Ekalavya. Of course, I think that was the only point of, I would not say dispute, disagreement between me and Dr. Kakodkar. I think regarding the rest of the book, I have to admit that the kind of freedom and free hand he gave me, now I realize when I try to do some other things, that it just came like so naturally, and it was a wonderful experience. I will like to quote one example, which, see, we were doing the various chapters, and at the end of the book, there are 3 chapters. One is written by Madam Kakodkar, Mrs. Kakodkar. One is written by his sister, Dr. Gangal, and one is written by me. When we had written all these chapters, and one fine day I realized that 2 of the chapters, that is my chapter and Madam's chapter, had the same title. Then I called up Dr. Kakodkar and said, sir, there is a problem. 2 of the chapters have the same title. Then I became a little bolder. I said, sir, you permit me to change the title of my chapter. So I wanted to call it Ekalavya. You heard about Ekalavya, he's so passionate about it. So I wanted to call it Ekalavya, my friend, philosopher and guide. Now all was well except for me calling him as my friend. He's more than 20 years my senior, his stature is so big. So I had a hesitation. So when I told him this, his immediate reply was, when children grow up and they are more than 18 years of age, you should treat them like your friends. So I have the honor of addressing Dr. Kakodkar as my friend. Thank you, sir. So I think I will just close with this. It was a wonderful experience, and like he said, it is for all of you to read and pass the judgment on the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Gangotra, you've been very brief.